I'll try to refer as much as possible to yesterday's piece. But generally, I'm going to talk about a couple of concepts and tools I have developed over past 6 months. As you can see from the title, there are few kind of main points I would like to address. Starting from the idea of formalization, what does it mean to formalize something? The concept of temporal scales or multiple temporal scales, thinking about compositional practice as a practice which address differences between temporal levels, the concept of form, and two kind of core technical contributions of my research, which is the development of the new pulsar generator instrument and a new model of Xenakian sieve. I will start with looking at the new pulsar generator, which is a software I have developed recently at research residency at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Kind of in my talk, I will kind of move simultaneously across these two paths, which one could be seen as a kind of retrospective, talking about the history of certain technical tools, compositional tools, my personal history and engagement with these tools, and research I have went through, and another path which could be seen as a sort of a prospective path, where I talk more about the potentialities of using these technologies for generation of new, interesting, and sometimes challenging musical forms. Let's start with the kind of global overview of the new pulsar generator. This is the screen I looked at yesterday while performing the piece. There's one bit missing, which is the code editor. The software has been developed in Super Collider programming language. Is open source, consists of the graphic interface as well as the capability of controlling all the elements of it through the language, the text editor. And in my performance yesterday, I moved between these two modes of interaction. One which is interact with all this variety of tables, which I'm going to explain in a second what all of these elements do to the sound. And on the other hand, I had a lot of pre-coded structures in the programming language, which I could execute and modify in real time. One of the kind of main elements of the pulsar generator, which is a kind of instrumental incarnation of a synthesis technique called pulsar synthesis, which has been kind of invented and developed by Curtis Rhodes in the 90s. Went through different phases of development and implementation in different programming environments. I think one of the most famous implementation is the one from late 90s, which I think has been released in 2001, which Curtis Rhodes co-developed with Alberto Di Campo, is the original pulsar generator. One reason why this piece of software is important, not only from the perspective of a technological development, but as well as from a point of view of historical and cultural artifact discussion. The software has been used extensively by a lot of composers who are affiliated with academia, such as Horacio Vagione or Curtis Rhodes. Jean-Claude Risset used some of the sounds from the original pulsar generator. But what's interesting about this this piece of technology is that it has been used extensively outside of academia by composers such as Florian Hecker, Markus Schmickler, and many others, or recently as well Russell Haswell, which I think is an interesting point in a debate about the division between academic electroacoustic music and kind of non-institutional practice. Boundaries which I think are less and less valid in today's environment. Kind of quickly, just to show you like different kind of zooming in into different elements of the interface. Just to point at the end of the presentation, I'll run the software live, so I can show you different ways of operating it and interacting with different elements of it. So it's kind of the main element of the technique called pulsar synthesis is the table side, where you could provide tables for pulsarette grain, pulsarette envelope, and the frequency, which is my own addition into the original design. You could think about these tables as a kind of lowest micro level way of controlling the sound. Each table has exactly size of 2048 samples, and can be further edited via a table editor, which is a bigger view of the table. Each editor has a lot of additional functionalities, which I'm going to talk through when we see the program running live. Another integral element of the software is the two-stage of sequencing the development of some structures. One is the micro sequencer, which allows control of all the main parameters of the synthesis via sequencers or via oscillators, and there is a set of pre-coded provided oscillators which I can select from. I will show you these at the end, and then last kind of main part of the control mechanism for the software is this direct control, where I can access the main parameters through sliders. And I think this combination of sliders, tables, and control provided via text-based interface, it's an interesting combination which address a lot of issues which has been raised yesterday in the conversation to do with what affordances the real-time mechanism and non-real-time mechanism gives us as a composers or as a instrument, digital instrument players. I think in my practice, I try to address these issues of temporality, the way I interact with the software, what is the temporal dimension of me playing with the instrument, the time taken to produce different values for the tables I've just showed you. It's a different temporal dimension, and so on. So I think this idea of temporality, the real-time control of the instrument, and then non-real-time production of values, which then can be used in the software, or this kind of in time and outside of time, if we would use Xenakian notions, these aspects of compositional practice are quite important in my own development. But above all of these, the main question I've been asking myself while developing this tool and while practicing with this tool and generating new material with it is the question of form, the musical form. What does it mean to approach music structure from a formal perspective? Where does the form exist? What temporal level we could call form? And obviously, this sort of discussion has been ongoing through history of music, but I think it's quite interesting in the context of current developments, especially from early 50s experiments with electroacoustic and then computer music. That the form, like from a compositional point of view, can be viewed as a multi-dimensional design space, in the sense that there are no intrinsic limits on the type and number of independent parameters that a composer can conceive or manipulate. In the simplest case, composers could choose to occupy themselves and organize pitch, rhythm, timbre of the composition, or spatial position of instruments, or if we talk about the digital medium, the spatial position of different sounds. But then going further, we could break this any of these entities like pitch, rhythm, timbre, or spatial position into other subdivisions. We could talk in terms of in domain of pitch. We could talk about continuous space subdivided into different tunings, scales, chords, clusters, and their combinations. In terms of timbre, we could talk about different articulations and variations of waveforms, spectra, filters, modulations, or recent developments of the MPEG-7 timbral descriptors. These all handle the so-called parameter space differently, and they emphasize different elements of the phenomena which interest us as composers. And to add to this, the domain of space can be subdivided into lateral position, vertical position, image width, image depth, panning speed, rotation speed, and so on. And to add to this already quite complex and dense image, all of these elements, all of these subdivisions interact with each other differently at different timescales. If we talk about perception of position, location of sound across 1 minute, and the same pattern shrunk down into a second, our perception of this will be totally different. And that kind of goes back to some of the things mentioned yesterday in a presentation by François Bernard. These beautiful shapes he had shown us have different impact perceptually when played over a minute, 2 minutes, or fraction of a second. So we could kind of generalize the kind of ideal schemata of form in this simple diagram. Going from the top, we could look at the root, or the kind of like the main piece, or the main section of the composition. Then that divides into more sections, subsections, phrases, and sound objects. And what's interesting about this, as I mentioned, idealized model, is this kind of model could function in a way to describe the whole piece of music, but as well as one little section of the music. We could think about these formal problems with form, musical form, they do stretch right into the very small element of the musical the temporal structure. That, from a compositional point of view, we compose these little sounds, by putting together in the context of additive synthesis different sine tones. That's a composition at very low level of sonic material. But at the same time, from the perspective of the listener, we can't expect listener to think that these little sounds are forms. And that's where all the kind of problematics for me start, where all of this discussion about the composition as a multi-temporal enterprise are being put forward into the audience and the listeners who may not be prepared or equipped or trained in listening in this way. And I want to emphasize that these multiple musical timescales are perceptual and physical reality. That we listen to music, to sounds on multiple time levels. You could hear my voice. You could hear the words, the sentences I'm putting forward to you. But at the same time, you can probably hear my tongue clicking and all other little noises around. That being said, you are not preoccupied with this micro level. You are more occupied with actually parsing the information I'm trying to convey. So saying this, kind of like building on this analogy, the musical meaning is embedded in layers and encoded in many musical parameters, acting on different temporal scales. And obviously, we could think about these three kind of main levels of compositional development, and music theory for long has recognized the importance of the hierarchical structure in composition. These hierarchies and ordering between them can be seen as an extended problem of the temporal, something I've already addressed. And expressed as a relationship between stationary time, something which in German can be called stehende Zeit, and moving time, which can be translated to bewegende Zeit. Excuse my German, I had really basics of it at primary. And these terms correlate with what Wassily Kandinsky described of point as a stehende Punkt and line as a bewegende Punkt. And that kind of this whole discussion about the temporality has been quite interesting for early writing of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who in his famous essay How Time Passes wrote that music presents order relationships in time, that we engage with time not only at the level of macro organization, which is the level of the whole piece, but within events themselves, and that's quite interesting point he made in this essay. I'm not going to go into critique because for whoever read this essay knows about the extensive critique coming from acousticians towards Stockhausen and the way he used certain concepts in his writing. But what was interesting in that essay, and was interesting for me as a young composer when I read it, is the fact that you could decompose a complex sound into smaller segments, whether these segments are interleaved sine tones, which is something again extensively used by Jean-Claude Risset, who utilized an inspection of an internal morphology of a note at microscopic timescale as a compositional material. So his spectrum analysis of sound samples portrayed a tone as a combination of individual harmonics, frequencies, each with its own distinct envelope evolving in time. I don't want to say that complex sounds can be equal to its decomposition into sine tones, because there is a lot of inharmonic content in sound, a lot of noises and kind of transient elements which contribute to the way things sound. But that was the kind of early conceptualization of the idea of decomposition of complex sound entities into smaller units. Just kind of briefly moving from Stockhausen and kind of like summarizing this idea of temporal dimension is that what was fundamental for it was the recognition that the sound at any object level can be broken down into a set of events on a smaller time scale. And I think it was a central importance in the early experiments with electronic sound medium. Beyond a distribution of sound in time, time itself becomes operationalized within sound. And in a way, the scale of what is to be composed, what is the material available for the composer became endless. Of course, there is a limit, and again, we are coming back to what I've mentioned earlier on, and the limit is the perception. And in my view, a truly multi-scale approach which respects all the different time scales, respects peculiarities of each time scale. It recognizes that patterns are difficult to perceive or even imperceptible on extreme timescales, as experiments of American psychoacoustician Diana Deutsch show. The sense of pitch when transposed at very high or very low is lost, and the transposition itself in domain of pitch is not a linear process. Pertinent cues characterizing the interaction between its units, the notes, cannot be maintained, and the perceptual properties of a pattern are not necessarily invariant across dilations and contractions of time. This inconsistency does not prevent us from applying such transpositions, but it merely means that we must recognize that each timescale abides its own rules of perception. And I made another circle, inner circle, going back to the question of form, that the articulation of coherent structural relationships across and between the meso, the micro, meso, macro, and micro-temporal levels is an ultimate test for a composition and consists a perennial issue in algorithmic and computer music. And as mentioned already, Jean-Claude Risset observed that a composer has to take a multiplicity of scales into account and provide connection between non-congruent temporal dimensions. And computer music extended the temporal field available to the composer and moved compositional activity to functionalize a multi-scale approach to musical form. To operate within a fully register of time scale is to shift the aesthetic focus away from the discrete sound entities such as notes, phrases, melodies, towards continuous and evolving objects of fuzzy boundaries. These new objects rarely conform to traditional angular forms of musical structure and tend toward cloud-like, evaporative, and continuously evolving morphologies. And then, from my perspective, simply then radicalizing this position, saying that I'm not longer interested in note-based music or with melodies. What this shift allowed is an integration and articulation of this functionalities particular to each category. In my opinion, computer music allows for better integration and articulation of note-based music and music which is based on melodies, as well as music based on different conceptual abstracts such as clouds or grains. If we would use some of the notions proposed by Curtis Rhodes in his seminal work Microsound. From this point, I started thinking, what are the ways for me to handle this extensive field of parameters, and there are, and this is obviously not my own invention. It's been happening in the history of music. You could treat the musical form from kind of two polarities, one which is the top-down, another one which could be called bottom-up. By top-down strategy, I mean the fact that the macro form, the form of the piece precedes its material. And you could think about the historical traditional musical forms such as rubato or rondo or sonata as being this sort of a macro form which preceded the actual material. So the top-down strategy starts with the design of the macro form, the design of the substructures, and then the creation of the sound material, which then feeds into this so-called frames. On the other polarity, we have the strategy of the bottom-up approach, which starts from direct interaction with sound material. This sort of approach is quite popular among young generation of composers who work with their tools and generate a lot of sound material. But obviously, this approach has a problem as well. That how do you generate the macro and the global form if you start from the little piece of sound or the interaction with the sound material. And like to follow the step by step, after the sound material comes the substructures, which emerge as a result of the low-level sonic processes, and then the macro form comes at the end. To give you an example of kind of radical approach of that kind of strategy, you could have a look at writing and compositional practice of Di Scipio, Agostino Di Scipio, who did a lot of work in this so-called emergent sonorities. And just to summarize this part before I move into the third element, which is the Xenakian sieve, I would like to kind of point the kind of main characteristics of the multi-scale approach, which in a way unites this top-down and bottom-up strategies in one sort of a pendular approach. That multi-scale approach favors flexibility, and as Curtis Rhodes, who coined the term multi-scale, or wrote a lot about the actual approach, as Curtis points out, it mediates between a high-level abstract plan, the top-down global structure, and opportunities emerging from a low level of sound material operations, the bottom-up local sonorities. And all temporal levels are to be composed at any time in compositional process. We can intervene by synthesis and transformation, and at any time scale, from macro scale of the whole work down to sections, phrases, sound objects, grains, even individual samples. To approach musical composition from a multi-scale perspective is to allow an interplay between inductive, the specific local, the interaction with sonic material, and deductive, the general, global, to do with the abstract frames of reference, whether these are historical or generative let's say, mathematical formulas. And I think that the integrative view on these two polarities has been proposed by Iannis Xenakis much earlier than Curtis Rhodes proposed it. Xenakis pointed out at the importance of thinking about music not only from the detail to the generality, but conversely from architectural to the detail. And I think this idea of moving freely between the global structure and the local sonic qualities and back is quite interesting concept, and certainly something I've noticed in my compositional practice, and something I employed in the composition that you have heard yesterday, and in the live interaction with the material during the performance. So within this multi-scale paradigm, the formal concern, as I mentioned earlier on, stretches across all available timescales and allows for a new conceptualization of musical form. At this point, I would like to shift into second technical development of my research, which is the new implementation of the Xenakian sieve. Just talk quickly about the actual procedure. Like, for those of you who are not familiar with the sieve as a formal tool, it's a tool in composition developed by Xenakis for construction of integer sequence generators that can be applied to generation of various numerical patterns to represent any sort of parameters of sound or any well-ordered sound structures such as pitch, time points, loudness, density, degrees of order, local timbres, etc., etc. Xenakis used this method in many of his pieces. Some of it's well documented, some of it is less documented, but one of the, I think the best documented uses of this approach has been his piano piece Herma, which analysis has been conducted a few years ago by group of researchers from ERCAM, including Moreno Andreata. Sorry, I don't remember the rest of the authors. But in this analysis, they went through the whole process of calculation of different pitch material and rhythm material, and proposed a mapping between these two, which then ended up as an actual score for the pianist, which I think is an interesting way to kind of, again, look at the development of musical form across different aspects of temporality, because on one side you have sieves, which, as Xenakis mentions in the chapter on sieves in his formalized music, sieves which are considered to exist outside of time in a way that they don't carry any temporal value. You could use this sequence of numbers as you wish, whether it's a pitch material, whether it's a rhythm material, or whether it's any other to control any other parameter of digital synthesis. And I think that was one of the uses of sieves, which Xenakis seen quite potential in the future, which he hasn't developed in a way. You could see some of the concepts similar in his development of dynamic stochastic synthesis, but as such he never developed sieves as a tool for synthesizing new sounds. In mathematical terms, Sieve is a metaphor for a process of abstraction, a set theoretical filtering out that generates series of integers, particularly by means of modulo operation that exhibit intervallic repetition. One of the most famous sieve is the sieve of Eratosthenes, which generates a set of prime numbers. If you are interested in the formula, I can give you that formula at the end. So the sieve can generate numerical sequences through a combination of simple set of integers by combining them through logical operators. And by logical operators, I mean the basic ones like intersection and union or symmetric difference and complementation. As I mentioned, Xenakis used some of the sieves in many of his pieces. Just to kind of show you quickly, I've been using two models of sieve generators. One model developed by Christopher Ariza in Python programming language, which generates this kind of shapes. Some of them are simpler, some of them are kind of more complex. So this aspect of my compositional practice happens non-real time through testing of different values and different input values for the sieve generators, and using different functions to kind of render the behavior of patterns. Then, once when I generate tons of these kind of tables, I import them back to Super Collider, where I can use them as input data for the pulsar generator. So in a way, you see this two aspects of working with musical form. One which is direct and which can be seen as direct interaction with the software, and one which is the kind of outside of time focus on generation of different patterns without actually thinking what they can be used for in a sonic realm. And the last point I would like to address is this issue of formalism and its relationship to intuition. I don't want to say I'm totally against formalism in a compositional domain, but certainly from my own compositional practice, I can see that formalism is quite closely coupled with intuition, and very often I start with this formal sieve procedures, and then I use them in a free way to generate material. Then I go back to again sieve procedures, which I use to edit the material I've just generated, and so on. So this process of kind of circulation between formalism and intuition is quite important for my compositional practice, and I can see it historically that a lot of composers worked in a similar fashion to even like one example I have from the top of my head is Stockhausen's notion of inserts. He kind of used it a lot in Kontakte, where he inserted some of the material which didn't belong to the rest of the piece, solely based on his listening to the material, not on the kind of formal procedure employed to compose the music. I would like to show you now quickly the software. The software has been developed in Super Collider programming language, and although this is the latest version I have developed recently in California, I've been constantly engaged with this particular synthesis technique for over 6 years or 7 years, and I went through different versions of kind of my own personal history of development of this instrument. I think first version of the pulsar generator, I don't have it running on this machine, but it has been developed in Super Collider as well by me as a commission for composer Florian Hecker, which he ended up using on some of his releases, I think for Mego, the Vienna-based label. This one has been developed recently, and one interesting kind of change, apart from a lot of kind of internal changes to do with the way things are coded. The synthesis is coded behind the interface, is the size of the interface, and it's a kind of anecdote. When I showed the previous version to Curtis Rhodes, he said it's way too small. He can't see it, and he wanted to prove that it's not because he's older, because he said his eyes are great, and he said he's going to prove that it's not his age, and he called his friend to testify it, and that friend was Clarence Barlow, who is older than Curtis, and he said, yes, it is too small. So yeah, I had to enlarge it, but I mean, this is just an anecdote. The actual interface had to be a bit bigger for like to go between different platforms and so on. So as I showed you earlier on, there are these key parts of the control mechanism. There is this kind of main control of the three streams or three trains of pulsar, the tables, the direct control, main control, and the two sequencers. There is a lot of extensions which I can talk through to you later on if you are interested. But just to kind of give you the kind of short glimpse of how do I start working with some of the material I have played yesterday. Just to mention, except the speech synthesis, which has been developed, kind of co-developed by me, but in collaboration with the Center for Speech Technology Research at Edinburgh University. But rest of the sounds and the treatment of the synthetic voice was handled in Super Collider. So just to give you an overview, like just once when you started the software, it starts and it loads some default tables. You know, it sounds quite dull when you do it, but then it has this way of editing. So these are all kind of shapes I have developed over the course of working on the PC you've just heard yesterday, and using these shapes, I've managed to generate a lot of variety of material. And I think one of the characteristic and something which really appealed to me sonically at first time when I heard pulsar synthesis, it was this complexity of sounds which kind of morphed continuously between rhythm and tone. And I think this discussion about the continuity between the rhythm and tone is quite important for the development of computer music. So as one thing which kind of interested me yesterday as well in a talk by François Bernard was his reflection on the relationship between the waveform, which is here in my case, and the envelope. That, you know, the simple, like in François Bernard's experience, the simple envelope, a simple waveform worked quite well with complex envelopes, and I think that's something which I found out as well. So you could use this harmonic editor to kind of generate this quite simple waveform. Just make the volume up, and then apply to it kind of more complex envelope. And then obviously by shifting the sound across different time scales, you could hear the differences. Don't look at names of some of these tables. They are like hairy leg. Sometimes I just make it up, and then I scratch my head and think like, what did I mean by that? But you could definitely hear the way the envelope and the waveform interacts with each other. So the technique is quite simple, and it's computationally quite efficient. And basically works with the repetition of the waveform. What makes it interesting is the way how these things can be extended, and the original pulsar generator kind of stopped at this level of control, and I thought about another level, which is the sequencing mechanism. So you have the sequence kind of acting at this level of 2 seconds. Which can be further modulated via oscillator, and as I mentioned, I don't have this kind of like choice of oscillators here, and these are kind of oscillators I was interested in while I explored the different control mechanisms. One of it is Gendin. So a lot of my work for the PC I've heard yesterday kind of started from this level of basically playing with sounds and inserting different tables. I could just to kind of show you, I could start from this level and end up with some shape drawn. I could copy this shape and insert it into one of the sequencers. So you could see that I could start with some shape in here, which been generated via one of the sieve generators in Python. Copy this shape into the sequencer. So let's play this. It sounds like this. But then I could insert this shape here. And then, another kind of extension of the software is this whole preset system, which allows me to morph between sets of presets, which again can be automated. And like to show you, like there were a few sections of the piece yesterday which were like completely new material generated in here. I haven't mentioned that earlier on that I'm an artist in residence at ZKM at the moment. So I've spent 2 days before the symposium working on new material. And funny enough, a lot of material I've generated sounded like bagpipes, which which makes me think that maybe I can get a Scottish citizenship based on that, or maybe, which is more likely, a permanent eviction. So just to show you the material I have generated. So it's these things here. And to kind of finish on a subjective and slightly not emotional, but kind of like close to my heart note. In 1998, when I was 14 years old, I used to skip school quite extensively, for which I was constantly in trouble with my parents and teachers. But in order to not being caught, I had to go into a different city because my town is quite small, so someone could see me. That's just the logistics, just to give you the whole picture. But the city I was going to was really big and had an amazing record store, and I've discovered there a lot of interesting music, including one record exactly in 1998, and I think it was October or November, so we are talking about roughly 20 years ago. There was this strange record called Gendin by a guy called Xenakis. I couldn't pronounce his surname that time. But I remember playing that in that music store. At that time, I didn't have first of all, the CDs were quite expensive, and I didn't have a CD player either. So I was listening to that on the headphones in the music store. The unadorned rawness of the sound output appealed to me, to my untrained ears, so much that years and years after, I carried this urge to seek that kind of experience from music, to be surprised, to kind of move myself into this kind of state, and at the same time, later on, as a composer, that was the kind of ideal I was aspired to. So that's just a kind of interesting note, and I was thinking about it a few days ago when I was coming to this conference, that it is such a pleasure for me to be here, to meet François Bernard and all other people involved in different projects with Xenakis. And I'm so happy to be a little part of this history now. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Are there any questions? I think there are many probably coming up in 1 or 2 hours. But are there some questions now?
It's not really a question, Marcin. Thank you very much for your talk. I just want to make you aware of something that you may be interested in. A few years ago, we published a book called Xenakis Matters.
Yeah, I have this book.
Okay.
Read it.
Did you read Thanos Economou's work on
spatial sieves? Yeah, I was actually going to mention it in my talk, but as you've seen, like I'm always, I have a lot of notes prepared, but then I'm such a passionate speaker, I don't really look at these notes, but I have it written there, and I wanted to mention different sieves, kind of models used in different areas.
No, but I think also in a way, because he explained to me at the time, and he doesn't really explain it in the article, that he discovered sieves and applied it first in his architectural practice when he was commissioned for 2 things. Number 1, a prison. Number 2, a courthouse. And because courthouses and prisons, there are places where some people can go, other people can't go, this and that and everything else. And the easiest way to sort of define the different functions spatially was using Xenakis' sieve theory. So I've always wondered about actually transcribing and applying sieve theory to music spatialization in a way.
Yes, I think that's one thing I've been planning to look at as part of this current residency, to kind of extensify this exchange between sieve theory and the practice and the pulsar generator. That was my original proposal for the residency, and certainly specialization is such a interesting aspect of music parameters to control. Just to add to your interesting comment about the architectural applications of sieve theories. Apparently, Xenakis used the sieve distribution for windows he have designed in the convent with Le Corbusier. I really would like to go there. I've seen some photos and videos, and you could see the windows and the beams have this kind of interesting intervallic structure, this kind of symmetry or kind of playfulness with symmetry and asymmetry, which is characteristic of sieve operations, which is another aspect, interesting aspect of kind of outside of time of these whole procedures and their application to different fields. Yes.
If there's no question from you, I have one question. And you mentioned quite a lot of time the bottom-up, top-down approach regarding basically time organization. And I think the experiences of the serial composition techniques, as well as Stockhausen's concept micro-macro, gave us the information or the experience that both times are not organized in the same way. Redundancy in the microtime has a completely different role than in the macrotime, or tolerances, or appreciation, or whatever. And this discussion, this critical discussion, I missed a little bit in your mention, because it seems like you can handle both the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I probably haven't emphasized it strong enough. I was trying to kind of point at it in this whole discussion about perception, that certainly there are differences between all of these time scales. They require different attention from the composer and from the listener, and I think you're absolutely right. And that was one of the outcomes of this article by Stockhausen, How Time Passes, that you can't apply one formula which could organize the whole temporal stratum, because each temporal level governs different perceptual laws, different abilities of the material as well. So definitely you're right. Maybe I didn't emphasize it strong enough, but that's why I think this fluid approach of using formulas, but having intuition and constantly evaluate the mapping between the formal procedure and the sonic result is quite critical, and that's something which could be seen extensively in the practice of Orazio Vagione, for example. This kind of formal and intuitional loop, as he called it, this kind of way of constantly sonically re-evaluating what has been produced by the mapping between sound and the formula.
Which is probably outcome of the completely unformalized
yes.
acousmatic music or musique concrète.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I've just as you told this, I thought Stockhausen has solved this problem in his opera Light, that he shifted up his formalism until the sonic level. So he has this super formula which goes down to the note but stops there.
Yeah, obviously that's one way of dealing with this these problems. But talking about this kind of fluid approach as well, I've mentioned Stockhausen earlier on a couple of times. I think there was one kind of story which goes back to his work on Studie 1, that he introduced this one cluster of frequencies which was totally not governed by the rest of the formula used in the piece, and apparently he inserted exactly this cluster of frequencies because I think his son was born, and it was like a gun salute. So you can see that even in this kind of highly kind of puristic formal approach, there is a human element. And then kind of to conclude this whole discussion about kind of formal approach and intuitional approach, at the end we start from intuition. I have chosen to work with these tools because I had an intuition to, or I wanted to. It was my choice. It wasn't a formula which told me to use these tools, not the other tools. So, it all starts from a decision, of a human to engage with certain tools and programming languages, instruments, and so on. So this element of kind of impurity in a way, non-formal procedure is there from the outset.
And I think in this aspect as well, Xenakis and the serial music approach, Xenakis as an architect of modernism. And the modernism had the same idea about formalism than the serial composers, that you construct the world out of, let's say algorithms, small algorithms, and everything can be constructed out of this small algorithm. And the idea was to, of course, to generate a new aesthetic language, but at the same time, with this, we have seen where it failed, where this utopia, this vision failed, or how far it is applicable.
Yeah, certainly. I'm from Poland, and I lived in a block of flats. I can be a living example of the failure of this kind of architecture. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Then thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.